Welcome to Duality Check, the podcast where two brothers embark on a thrilling journey through the realms of scientific inquiry, the enigmatic mysteries of the past, and the uncharted territories of spirituality. Join us as we explore the wonders of our world and beyond, all while embracing the roles of curious bystanders rather than experts. Together, we'll unravel the intricate tapestry of existence, blending the dichotomies of knowledge and wonder. Get ready to question, ponder, and delve into the dualities that shape our understanding of reality on Duality Check. I'm Drew.
And I'm Dean.
And I'm ChatGPT. No, just kidding. Not this time.
But we do have it on standby now.
We've
after
got it
last
in the background,
episode,
ready to go.
If at any point we need to ask a ChatGPT question, we can now.
Or ask for a long answer so we can go take a break while we're still recording.
Right. Write a novel about this. Yeah. We'll be back, people.
Enjoy. This is all new.
So today we are going to be talking about the moon.
The moon is weird.
It's super weird.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of theories and there's a lot of, science doesn't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even have all the answers about Earth.
Right.
So imagine trying to get answers about the moon. And we're going to talk about it a little bit.
We'll get into that. What do we want to cover before?
So we got some
into that?
We got some email. Well, we got a couple of comments, and then a clip that I sent Dean about ChatGPT, about Bitcoin. And I'm not 100%. I didn't do a ton of research on who this guy is or his background or anything. But maybe we'll update you on that.
Yeah.
It says right here, Da Vinci Jeremy. Is that not this person, or is that a comment?
Yeah, because this guy's Luna Real, so I think it's got to be this Da Vinci Jeremy guy.
Bitcoin ETF wins SEC approval. I don't know what that is.
Anyway, yeah, so this is an interesting little clip Drew just sent me about Bitcoin. Let's play this real quick.
Nakamoto.
You in the CIA.
Well, I think that based on what I learned about the source code, it was created by somebody in the NSA. The evidence of that is the randomizer. And so there's lots of a certified method that's stated that they don't have any backdoors. They've been checked and rechecked, and they're certified to not have any backdoors. Yet Satoshi didn't use any of them, all the certified methods. He used this obscure method, which wasn't certified. And a lot of developers scratched their head until Snowden. When he released that, the NSA had backdoors to all the certified randomizers. With enough data, they could actually reproduce the random number that you actually chose. So,
okay. Does that mean they can break codes?
Technically, they can break
all the security.
Get your Bitcoin, basically. But Satoshi chose the one randomizer. They didn't have a backdoor. How is that possible? Did he get lucky? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. I thought you could kick out of that a bit.
I did not. I've never heard that before, which is super cool. It does tend to suggest that, well, we still don't know if Satoshi is a person or a group.
Right.
But it does suggest that if Satoshi's a person, it might have been a person inside the NSA.
or somebody with
or if it was a
access
group,
to the
one of them,
information.
or he had like a NSA insider who let him know, that was in fact the case.
That they had backdoors into all these certified randomizers or whatever.
Right. And so if you don't understand the concept he's trying to cover here, so essentially in computing, you use random numbers that are super useful in all sorts of computational scenarios, especially in encryption. And the thing is computers, they're digital, they're all ones and zeros, and everything's very predictable. And so how do you get a computer which runs off ones and zeros to create a random number? And the thing is most of the ways that people have come up with to create quote unquote random numbers aren't truly random. And so you'll actually hear computer people use the term pseudo-random a lot. And the problem with if you were to use something like that in Bitcoin is with enough computing power, you could essentially recreate the conditions that random number was generated under in order to recreate whatever random number you want to recreate in order to break encryption.
Yeah.
And anyway, it
sounds like
pretty insane
Satoshi chose the one that wasn't certified,
which was the only one that didn't actually have a backdoor.
Specifically that the NSA had an access to, because it could still have backdoors in a sense, right? From some other source.
Yeah, right. At least the NSA doesn't have a backdoor.
Right. So that means that potentially
it could be a different intelligence agency, though, that knows what the NSA knows.
Sure. But this specifically was, the NSA, and he referenced the Snowden stuff and how Snowden had, and the government wasn't really prepared for that. So it's not like they could have, unless everything we've ever, even Snowden was like a plant to suggest that we had some sort of insight into what's going on,
Well,
but I'm just saying, like, Snowden
clearly pissed off the government. Right.
So I'm saying the government probably wasn't prepared for that. So that lends credibility to the fact that it was an authentic,
Right. It was a bit of knowledge,
notion.
If what this guy is saying is true, there's not really a way around the fact that Satoshi had to work for an intelligence agency, not necessarily only the NSA.
Yeah,
and not necessarily American, because it's possible other intelligence agencies have spied on ours and know what our capabilities are.
Or have friends and allies within the different governmental bodies or whatever. Yeah, so it really just means that they had some sort of inside knowledge, and their personal goals with Bitcoin did not align with whatever agency they were working for at the time.
Right, because if they worked for the NSA and they were loyal to the NSA, and if Bitcoin was an NSA tool, they would have used one of those certified methods.
Right.
That did have a backdoor.
And they would have kept it quiet for the whole time.
They would have allowed Bitcoin to grow until, at the point where they wanted to seize it.
Yep. Either seize it or take control of it when it became a world currency. Like, wait to the point where it becomes the new currency and then you have control over it. Instead of it being decentralized, it's now centralized again.
Right. You can use your backdoor to take control of anyone's wallet.
So you can then use force to control the population the same way that you
which would fundamentally break Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And if Bitcoin was the world currency when that happened, it would cause crazy economic turmoil.
Yep. Or at least fear, because now you know that your stuff, just like we do now, like the government has full control of your money. Like, if you piss them off, they can just come and take it.
Right. They can just
seize it
with the cooperation of your bank.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Good tidbit. But turns out Satoshi was an insider who was not working for the government in the creation of Bitcoin.
Yeah. So yeah, that gets us
Unless another intelligence agency is sitting on a backdoor for this randomizer algorithm, but
right, and that's what I meant by like the fact that like you would think that if the NSA is the one that was creating these backdoors into the randomizers that had the backdoors and all the other randomizers, you would think that they would have one, unless the person who created the randomizer didn't want the NSA to have it. But you would think that even if it was a governmental agency, like the whole Snowden thing would have been like, I don't know. I guess it depends. Yeah, I mean, it could be another governmental agency, or it could be another private, company or agency that has the backdoor.
Yeah, I mean, it's well known in computer science that governments all over the world, as well as corporations and hackers, are constantly battling to collect backdoors to things.
Yeah,
they're trying to collect things called zero-day exploits.
Yep.
And a 0 day is just like, excuse me, a 0 day is just a technique for hacking something. It's a way to get into something. And it's called a 0 day because whatever company is responsible for producing that thing has had 0 days to patch it.
Yep.
And so if you have like a known 0 day exploit, if you're a white hat hacker, you would go to the company whose product it is, and they would pay you a bounty to turn in that 0 day exploit to them so they could patch it. If you're a government actor, you'll likely collect it and keep it quiet and not let that company know so that you can use that in law enforcement cases or in espionage or whatever.
Right.
If you're, a black hat hacker, the ones who actually are trying to, steal things, then obviously you're gonna
use it to
hang on to that info for your own use, for
blackmail the
theft
companies,
or blackmail or whatever you need.
Yep.
Yeah. So interesting. Okay. So
we don't have much other correspondence.
Yeah, we had a couple small comments. I did have a buddy comment, actually a cousin comment, saying that asking what's a good wallet to start with. And so if you, I've got links in the show notes of the Bitcoin episode with like all these different wallet links and stuff. I will leave those at the beginning of these show notes too, if you're interested. But if you go on bitcoin.org, which is a great website that's like a nonprofit just for like Bitcoin education and stuff, they've got a bunch of recommended wallets. That's a good place to learn the basics of Bitcoin for onboarding and like learning the basics. Anyway, they got some wallets there. There's a Reddit group called Bitcoin Beginners, and they have a Bitcoin FAQ for beginners. And on there, they review a bunch of different wallet software and kind of go over the pros and cons. I'll leave that link. And then personally, I enjoy the Exodus wallet. It's cool. It's a multi-crypto wallet. It's got a lot of features. But
is that the one that's like app-based and web-based?
There's a bunch of wallets that are, but this one's an app. Yeah,
okay.
This one's an app. But it's multi-platform, so I can have it on all my devices and whatnot. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's it for correspondence this week.
Yeah.
So, we could dive into this episode.
Let's do it.
So, I know you've been reading a book.
Yeah, I've been reading a book by Christopher Knight. It's called Who Built the Moon? It's Christopher Knight and a co-author,
Is it the same
Alan
co-author?
Butler. And these are the guys that wrote a book called Civilization 1, which is a sweet book I read years and years ago when I was first getting into these weird topics. It's a cool book that essentially makes the case by hunting down the origins of our measurement systems across the world. They essentially branch like a family tree. They have relations to each other, and they were able to use that information to trace back and suggest evidence that all of these ancient measurement systems are actually related to a source measurement system from a source civilization, and that essentially the different branches of measurement have all come from one source.
Interesting.
In the process of that, they ended up finding some weird measurement details about the moon, and that inspired them to write this book. And they kept investigating about the moon, found all this weird stuff going on with it. I haven't finished the book yet, so maybe we can do like a partial part 2 on our next episode or something, and review if there's anything interested in this latter half of the book that I haven't gotten through yet.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Once you finish it, if you find stuff that you want to bring up, I think the next episode will probably be another secret history of the world. So
right.
We'll probably we'll easily start off with something like that.
Yeah.
So let me get to my notes here. So I don't know how you wanted to start this, but I mean, the moon is weird. There's a lot of things about the moon that science can't explain.
Right.
You know, the formation, its formation. You know, that's kind of like
the formation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because that kind of like sets us off. Like the fact that we don't know how it was formed. Sure, we have a lot of theories or hypothesis about how it was formed, but we haven't. There's no, factual, fully like understood.
Yeah. So let me first try and convince people that the moon is weird. Because a lot of people who haven't read on this topic are like, well, I mean, the moon's the moon. We've seen it there our whole life. Right. Everyone's always seen it. It's a moon. Other planets have moons. We have a moon. What's so weird?
Right.
Well, let's talk about some of the weird things of the moon. So first off, the weirdest thing about the moon is its size.
Yeah.
The moon is way bigger compared to Earth, its host planet, than any other moon in the solar system. We've never
planet, right?
Right, versus its planet. It was with the one exception of Pluto, and it has a body, but it's like half the size of Pluto, which is really big.
Yeah.
But it's almost so big that can you even call it a moon? Because it's almost like they likely co-orbit each other.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't they call it like a binary planet or like a dual planet or whatever?
So it's unclear whether or not that even counts as a moon. Plus, Pluto doesn't even count as a planet anymore. So there's going to be all sorts of weird stuff happen out there.
Yeah.
In the Kuiper Belt.
Nearest it.
But every other planet, their moons are tiny compared to the host planet. There are 2 other moons that are larger than our moon, but those are moons of Jupiter, which is gigantic.
Right, so it could be larger and still be at the scale.
Right.
They're small enough
still
scale.
Their scale compared to Jupiter is more in line with what we notice of moons.
Right.
And, these smaller moons kind of make sense. Like, if the formation were to happen as the planet is forming, right? So like you can think of like the proto solar system as this like, soup of all this matter and gas and different material spinning together and collecting. And you get these planets forming in these accretion disks. And at the time that the planet's forming, if not all the material forms into that same mold, you can get smaller lumps on the outside that can form into, moons. But that makes sense for smaller moons. It really doesn't make sense for something like our moon. And there's scientific ways to tell and investigate and figure out formation. So,
yeah, the point about accretion that I know, is that when you have an accretion type of formation, the planet and its moon share a lot of the same traits. Mm-hmm. Right? Don't they? They would share a lot of the same fundamental building blocks.
Right.
It's just on a different scale.
Well, they would be different because the the layers of the accretion disk would likely you
they
get
would form,
denser
like,
material
different
on the
yeah,
inside than on the
right.
outside, so you can get different component makeups if they co-form together from the same accretion disk.
So the less dense, and that could explain in a sense, and that's probably why this theory came out in the first place, was that the less dense stuff is what formed the moon. That's why this moon is so much less dense than the Earth.
Well, yeah, so back on why the moon is weird. So it's, I think it's a little over a quarter the size of Earth, just a little bit, but it's only like 1% of the mass of Earth.
Right.
So it's super light for its size.
For how big it is, yeah.
Compared to Earth. Also, solar eclipses.
Right.
Eclipses are weird.
Like total eclipses, yeah.
Total solar eclipses, like what's going to happen
in
April
3 days.
8th, which will be in the past for you guys when you hear this, but for us, it's in 3 days.
Ago.
Yeah.
No, I guess it would be a week and a day ago.
Yeah.
That's right.
So the thing about solar eclipses is that in order for it to work, the moon must, from Earth, be at least the size of the sun or bigger. Right? And so there's this weird thing with the moon where the sun is actually 400 times larger than the moon, and the moon is 1/400th the distance to the sun.
Yeah.
And so it appears as though the moon and the sun are the same size in the sky. Obviously, depending on like the eccentricity of the moon's orbit, it gets closer and further at different times.
Right.
But the fact that it can happen at all is super weird.
You know, and I was watching a debunking theory about this, and it was talking about how it only happens 31% of the time.
That it could happen.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's still a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the fact that it is the size that it is at the distance it is pretty crazy that we can have these. Like, do we know of any other planet, moon, sun?
There's no other planet in the solar system that
can have
that has
right?
full solar eclipses.
Could it happen on another planet? It just wouldn't happen in the same magnitude, right? So like it would happen, you would have to be like an ant on the surface of another planet.
No, it doesn't matter what size you are.
The perspective.
Yeah, that your size doesn't necessarily change that perspective. It would change the perspective of things that are close to you, but it wouldn't change the perspective of things that are farther away.
That far away.
Yeah. What you would need, say Jupiter were to have full solar eclipses, it's further from the sun than Earth. You know what? Now I'm not even sure, because it's further than Earth. And so it would need one of its moons to take the same distance from Jupiter to the sun, and then take 1 divided by that, and that should be the distance from Jupiter to its moon.
And the size of
its moon. The moon should be, exactly that
size.
amount less size than the sun in order for it to perfectly make an eclipse. But I don't think any other moon in the solar system does
we've
that.
Discovered, right? Like we'd have to be on the surface to really know.
You could calculate it. We know enough details. We know about the orbital mechanics and the sizes.
Sure.
Of all the different planets and
but it's
moons
not
that
definitely
we know
nothing
about,
that I've heard about, in doing the research.
Right.
So that was the accretion theory.
The other thing that's interesting about solar eclipses is the way they work. So, the Earth or the moon goes around the Earth in is about 29 days, right?
Yep.
And its orbit around the Earth is about a 5-degree tilt from our plane with the sun. Mm-hmm. And that's why we don't get eclipses every time the moon comes around near the sun on a new moon, right? Every time there's a new moon, it's a new moon because we look out at the sky and there's the moon, and behind it is the sun. And so the moon is backlit, which is the dark side pointing towards us, which is the shadow of the moon pointing towards us. But it doesn't fall on the Earth because it's 5 degrees up or down, right? So if you look at the plane, the plane of the ecliptic that the Earth is on with the sun.
The shadow is not hitting the Earth.
Right.
The shadow is going past Earth.
Right.
I see. Yeah.
So if you have the plane of the ecliptic where the Earth orbits around the sun, and then you have the plane of the moon 5 degrees off from that, that means there's only 2 times in our orbit around the sun where the moon even can perfectly line up with the sun.
Right.
It has to be at that point where the moon crosses from the top to the bottom side of the plane that we're on with the sun.
Right.
And so there's 2 times a year that it can happen.
But it doesn't always happen because even those 2 times it's not going to happen, right?
Right. Well, so not only when it crosses, but it has to cross it in a position where on the other side, where the moon is directly pointed at the sun from our perspective.
Right. Because it could happen in a sense, because we have so much water, it could happen where you'd have to be on the ocean to see it.
Right.
And then
it does happen that way.
And then
we
we'd see
time.
like a percentage of the eclipse, but it's not a total eclipse unless you're
right.
Gotcha.
So that's interesting. There's basically 2 times a year that an eclipse can happen, a solar eclipse, but it doesn't always happen, and it depends on where you are on Earth as to where the moon's shadow will land.
When was our last one? It was like 2019?
I don't know. I don't think that was the last one. That was the last one that we had a chance to see. I think it was 2019.
Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
Which was really cool. If you guys have never seen a total solar eclipse, by the time you hear this, it's too late to catch the one that's 3 days from now.
Yeah.
But I highly recommend it. It was a really cool experience when I went with my nephews.
Watching everything get dark and animals get quiet.
So we live in California, and totality in that eclipse didn't go through California. So we actually drove all the way up to Idaho.
That's right.
Which our aunt lives up there. So that was cool. We were able to stay with her. But so we go out there. And we find this spot on the side of the road, right in the path of totality. And we pull off and we sit there and wait. We got our eclipse glasses, and you're watching the moon slowly start to cover the sun. Yeah. And then right as it was about to fully cover the sun, it got super quiet. All the birds in the air landed and shut up. Any bugs or anything, it just got eerily silent because freaks out the animal life. Why is it night? They're I'm a day animal. I usually hide at night. I'm gonna shut up and hide now.
Yeah,
it is really trippy.
Yeah,
and the view is just amazing. It's freaking gorgeous.
It's got this golden hour type of glow to it.
Yeah.
It
looks like you're all of a sudden, you're in twilight. It's not completely dark, but it's real.
It's dark enough
it's
to
real dark.
Make a big notice.
It's a pretty incredible experience.
Dusk or dawn,
Oh, I'll leave a link to this. There's a really cool YouTube channel, which I'm sure if you listen to someone like me, maybe you've heard of, but it's called Smarter Every Day. This guy, Destin, he's a NASA scientist, and he has this really great channel where he does all sorts of cool science stuff, but he did an episode on that solar eclipse in 2019.
Okay.
And he was able to calculate the perfect place to go in order to photograph the eclipse and watch the space station transit across the eclipse.
Oh, shit. That'd be cool.
It was super cool.
That's cool. So he has a video of that or no?
Yeah, he has a video of it
cool.
on YouTube.
Because he went there and did that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he got like nice high quality camera and he pointed it right up at that and they were able to time it so that right in totality during the full eclipse, they just able to see the space station zoom across the disc.
That's cool.
Yeah, this is super cool. I highly recommend checking it out.
I want to watch that.
But yeah, there's other stuff that's weird about the moon. For instance, and I didn't get to do all my backup research on this, but essentially there's a weird phenomenon on the moon where the craters that it has, they only go a maximum of about like 2 or 3 miles deep, no matter how wide they get. Right. So like you think like the wider and wider and wider the crater, probably the bigger and bigger and bigger the impactor that created it. Right. And you would think that the depth of the crater would get proportionally deeper with the wider that the crater gets. Mm-hmm. And that is the case until you get up to a certain point and reach that maximum depth. And once you reach that point, even as the craters get bigger and bigger and bigger, they no longer get deeper anymore.
Right.
Almost like there's some crazy hard reinforced shell under the surface of the moon that prevents entry any deeper.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, we could go through some of these theories on like how the moon, just to go back a little bit, like how the moon might have been. You know, there's the capture theory, the accretion theory, which we went over a bit, the fission hypothesis, which was basically that the Earth was spinning so fast that some of the material had broken away to form the moon.
Yeah, I think that was the first official proto-Earth. Yeah, I think that was the first like official scientific explanation.
The one that's mostly accepted now, the most widely accepted one, is the giant impact theory.
Right.
And this is that there was a Mars-sized planet near Earth during its development, or early stages of development, and it smashed into it, creating, and then it was spinning and doing all its normal processes. So it created the moon out of this giant impact that shot up a bunch of material into space, and then the gravity kind of pulled it together and formed the moon.
Right. But the devil's in the details with that theory as far as how far it goes, because in order for the theory to work, and in order for the moon to be the moon we have, the impact had to be at such an angle,
such a perfect angle,
and velocity that essentially only the mantle of the Earth and whatever that, or the proto-Earth and that proto-planet that collided, only the mantle material of those two got spit out to form the moon.
Right, and not the actual interior core or anything like that.
Right, and there's another problem with that theory where essentially in order for something to hit the Earth and create the moon in that way, it has to hit it at a kind of an angle, and in doing that, it would impart incredible angular momentum onto the Earth, and our rotation speed would be incredibly high, and our days would be like a few hours long.
Right.
And so in order to correct for that, the theory later evolved into two impacts, where the first impact created the moon, and then the second impact slowed the Earth's rotation back down. So,
I mean, couldn't the slowing of the rotation be due to gravity upon other objects, like within the solar system?
Yeah, but that's going to be a really gradual slowing.
Sure.
Whereas,
we're talking about proto-Earth.
Right, but there's, an object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by an outside force, right? So when you impart incredible rotational angular velocity onto the proto-Earth, it can be slowly, slowed down by that forming moon and by tidal forces and other gravitational forces. But the effects of those is minuscule compared to the huge impact that imparted that momentum.
Right. That makes sense.
Which is why they had to introduce a second impact in order to get rid of it, because there wasn't. Otherwise, we would still to this day have way too much angular momentum.
So the original theory didn't hold up, and they had to adjust it, basically.
Right, and I think it's changed a few more times since that version. I don't know that that's the modern version of the theory.
Probably not. Yeah. So I just wanted to, before we finish that part, just talking about the formation, I wanted to read this quote from Dr. Rohan Brett of NASA. It seems much easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence.
Mm-hmm. There is a variation, I don't know if it's the same person, who said, the best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist.
No, probably not the same person, but that's great. I think we might be up on a break here.
Yeah, I think we are.
So we'll come back and we'll dive a little bit deeper into the moon.
Yeah.
At least as deep as that shell.
3 miles deep into the moon. All right,
we'll see you in a bit.
Be back. Welcome back.
We are back.
Yeah.
So we left off on a little quote from Dr. Rohan Brett. And where do you want to go from there?
So what were the other formation theories? You had them written down? I've got them here too.
Capture theory, the accretion hypothesis.
I think the first one was the fission theory.
Yeah, fission.
Which was the idea that the Earth was rotating so fast that it essentially threw the material of the moon off of it.
Yep.
And
which would make sense for the outer stuff to be the lightest, less dense stuff.
Right.
And then
the problem with that one is even the semi-liquid Earth, it has too much viscosity for rotation to overcome that.
Yeah.
Without extreme rotation, which again we'd be back in the same problem with too much rotation.
Right.
Then there's the co-accretion theory, which is the idea that Earth had rings like Saturn that formed into the moon. That essentially the material of Earth, leftover material from Earth's accretion disk, formed into the moon. But apparently that also doesn't work with the observed angular momentum, because if it formed that way, I believe it would have a faster moon day, and it wouldn't be like tidally locked to us where we see the same side always.
What is the cause? Like, did you do any research on what the cause of the tidal lock was?
I don't know. I didn't figure that out.
I wish I would have actually figured out why it's tidally
locked. Why don't we ask
ChatGPT? That's great. That's a great question to ask ChatGPT.
What is the best reason that we have right now for why the moon is tidally locked to the Earth? Please keep it to a paragraph or two.
The moon is tidally locked to Earth due to tidal friction. Over millions of years, the gravitational forces between the Earth and the moon slowed the moon's rotation to the point where the same side always faces Earth. This process, known as tidal locking, occurs because the Earth's gravitational pull exerted a stronger torque on the closest part of the moon, creating tidal bulges. Over time, the energy dissipation from the internal friction within the moon, caused by the Earth's gravitational forces, led to a synchronization of the moon's rotational period with its orbital period around Earth. This means the moon rotates on its axis in the same amount of time it takes to orbit Earth, resulting in the same hemisphere always facing towards us.
Right.
Right, so it still rotates in the sense that it needs to, but it rotates around, like it stays facing the Earth in the same way, but as it rotates the Earth, it's rotating the same amount, so that's always the same face, but it's still rotating in the sense of there's still parts of it that are being shown to the, like there's still sun being beaten on it.
Right. Well, it's going around us and the same face is always facing us, which means it has to rotate in order to keep showing us the same face. If it didn't rotate at all, we would see a different side of it each quarter of its orbit.
Which would be, so every few days we'd see a different...
Right. So, but then there's the difference between like the full rotation, like the orbital rotation. So like essentially it does one, quote unquote, one full turn per orbit, but that just makes its face back to Earth. But if you take into account, like if you were looking above the moon and you like put a mark on one side, the true orbital or the true rotation period is a little bit shorter before that same point faces the same way. But because the Earth and the moon are moving together around the sun, it has to compensate for the new position of the Earth. So it takes 27 days for a sidereal day of the moon, and it takes 29 days, which is the same as its orbit around the Earth for a rotation.
A little bit of leeway there.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So that's the co-accretion. Then there's the intact capture theory that got popular for a little while.
Like it came fully formed into the solar system and was captured by the Earth's gravitational force.
Which is probably even, I don't know, it's probably a competition between that and the current theory as to which is less likely.
Yeah.
Because it would be incredible for the thing to be coming at us at the exact speed, velocity, and like position that would allow the Earth to capture it. It would be incredible. Yeah. So that theory fell out of favor. And it's also more likely in way more scenarios. If that were to happen, it would more times than not, it would end up hitting the Earth.
Right.
Rather than being captured by it.
And then there's the idea of like, there's people who put multiple of these theories together into one.
Oh, yeah. Like hybrids.
Where they do like, they say there's like the giant impact theory, but also that it was a fission thing. Like that impact happened during a point in the proto-Earth being formed, that there was an impact where it was impacted in a form where like it wasn't a solid body that it hit, but it hit in like almost like if you think of like two. So the visualization that I saw was like what looked like two, spheres of like sand hitting each other in their rotational, like they were rotating, and as they hit, they kind of like spun around each other, and then separated and came back together multiple times to create eventually the Earth and a smaller body outside of it. So
Right.
almost like a fission and a giant impact at once.
Right.
And that might lend credibility to the second impact, right? There being an initial impact that spun it fast and then it was shot back out, but then the gravity brought it back in. There was a second impact.
I think that's essentially a variation on the current theory.
Yeah.
But
Definitely.
there's other weird things about the moon, which is that it's likely hollow, or at least the interior
of hollow.
is spongy or has pockets of hollow. But we know that most of the moon's mass is on the outside. And one of the ways we know that is because they've sent up probes to do a gravity map of the moon. And the first number of missions that went to the moon failed. They would either hit the moon or they would miss the moon. There was a whole bunch of failures in trying to go to the moon. And it was found out later that the moon has a really kind of erratic gravitational field. It's not very uniform as you go around it, which causes you, if you're flying a spacecraft, to have to constantly be making like corrections.
Major adjustments, yeah.
And so they finally sent a probe up there to map the gravity, and with that gravity map, they were able to compare it to the actual map of the moon, like the topological map, and they were able to find that the gravity anomalies have a high correlation with the shape of the mass of the moon from the exterior. So like mountain ranges, for instance, like big mountains are going to be more massive, and then you're going to see a gravity anomaly in that area.
Right.
And other areas where there's, maybe a big valley or whatever, there'll be less gravity. And so the gravity maps onto the normal map actually pretty well, which means that it's the outer mass of the moon which is
creating the gravitational forces,
which is creating the weird gravity anomalies.
Core. It's not an iron core. That was, if it was uniform, you would suggest like the Earth gets more uniform of gravitational, so that it lends the idea that we have a solid core.
Right. So for the Earth, we do have gravitational anomalies as well.
Sure.
And we have a gravity map of the Earth, and it's not uniform, but it's the differences between the extremes of like the high and low gravity are way smaller.
Right.
It doesn't vary from its quote unquote uniform gravitational
level. Peaks
level
to valleys,
Right. It's not like as you fly over the Rockies, there's a gravity spike for the Rockies, because it's not the surface. The surface of the Earth is minuscule compared to the internal mass. And so really it takes something big, some sort of big cavity, some sort of big like iron deposit, or some sort of
shift in the way it
inside the Earth
of the
to
interior.
explain the anomalies of Earth's gravity.
So the surface is not affecting the gravity on Earth. It's what's happening within Earth.
I mean, it is, but it's so minuscule.
Yeah, you're not going to feel it flying an airplane across.
Right. Or like the satellite orbits aren't going to have to correct for it.
Right. So it's interesting.
So the moon has a lot of its mass towards the outer side of it, towards the outside. And because of that, the moon also rings like a bell.
Yeah, so the Apollo 12 mission, they had set up seismic seismometers on the moon in order to capture some of these moonquakes that were happening. And also what they decided to do on their descent or when they were leaving the moon,
right,
was crash back the lander.
Right, so they took the lander and they met up with the spacecraft orbiting the moon, and they docked, got back on,
and then they shot it back down.
They shot it back down at the moon.
Yeah,
and it hit with like the I think it was like the force of like 1,000 tons of TNT.
Yeah, and they pointed it near one of their seismometers that they had installed so that it could detect what was going on. And there's a weird effect when it hit is that the moon rung for about an hour. The impact took about 8 or 9 seconds to build up to its highest point of reverberation, and then a slow decay of a little less than an hour before the reverberations finally went away, which doesn't happen on Earth,
right? Well, it's also weird that it built up to a high point, right? Because you would expect, if it was a solid mass, that it would hit and the most strong resonance would be right then and there, and then it would just decay from there. But the fact that it built means those waves were moving around the moon, and the resonances were interacting with each other to cancel and build, causing a peak to build.
That they weren't hitting anything else to impede
those waves. Meaning those waves were traveling around the moon and interacting with each other.
Yeah. And likely very little else.
Right.
That's what gives us this idea of hollow moon. And also the effect
it was a ton of TNT, the Apollo 12 one. But then Apollo 13 did it as well. So Apollo 13 was the mission where they had the explosion.
Oh, yeah.
That's the famous one with, the Apollo 13 Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah.
Where they were going to land on the moon, but they had an explosion on the way to the moon. And instead, they used the moon as a gravity assist to sling back to Earth. But in doing that, after they swung around the dark side of the moon and started heading back towards Earth, they ejected their entire landing module, right? So 12 had landed, right? And then the actual lander has multiple stages, and the part that shoots back up is just part of that.
That stays behind.
Right.
Yeah.
So Apollo 13 jettisoned that whole thing.
Just for science, for the sake of science.
Well, no, I think it was...
Did they need it?
I think it was to help them.
Boost.
Yeah. And to get rid of the dead weight and stuff.
Well, it's a happy coincidence that it's good for science, too.
So they eject it, and this one hits much harder than the Apollo 12 one.
Which was how much?
1 ton. This one was 11.5 tons of TNT versus the 1 ton of TNT on Apollo 12. And it reached peak intensity after 7 minutes. And then it took almost 3.5 hours before the reverberations finally went away.
Traveling to the depth of 25 miles.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to travel that far in Earth.
Yeah. That's exactly what seismic scientists do.
Well, I mean, the reverberations of something that impacts Earth, would it travel that deep?
If we got hit by a big enough impactor,
sure.
Those,
but not the Apollo
that's going to send reverberations around the Earth. But the thing is, the Earth is so much more solid.
Yeah,
and it's got that liquid core. So as it hits the the change of material is going to cause a loss of energy and a spreading. And so it's not, the Earth won't keep ringing for hours, but those reverberations will travel out through the crust.
So at the very least, we're talking about the Earth's or the moon's core being much less dense than the outside, the mantle of the moon. The core being so much less dense than the mantle.
Well, so apparently there's been more studies, and they've settled on that the moon does have an iron core.
Okay.
But that it's really small compared to the size of the moon. It's like 480 miles or something, which is tiny compared to the size of the moon.
Yeah. So it's tiny. It's less dense than still the rest of the material that make up the surface.
Yeah, it's what's between that iron core and the exterior, the crust of the moon. That
you could still have a core.
It has to be empty, or it has to be some incredibly light material. And the problem with that is that now the moon formation theory, like, how do you explain a thing hitting Earth and spitting out a bunch of material? How do you explain that forming in such a way to where there's a little core, a bunch of either nothing or sponginess, and then the majority of the mass on the outside, so that the mountain ranges affect the gravity.
Right, and then having the shell,
because normally
that protects
you would think the heavy stuff
would
have sunk in past whatever that spongy material is, because it, in theory, it should have been molten as it was being formed too, right? Being ejected from Earth.
Well, and there's stories of it being like a.
So why didn't the heaviest stuff all fall down into the center?
Because that's not where the gravity was pulling it to. It was pulling it out, and that goes into this other evidence.
Well, no, gravity always pulls to the center of mass. So even if the outside is where all the mass is, it's the center of mass that is the effective point of pulling of gravity.
Yeah.
So like a basketball, right? Yeah. It's hollow. Mm-hmm. It's just air inside, but the outside is where all the mass is. But the center of mass is still the center. So if a basketball was strong enough to pull its own outside inward, the outside material would go in and the air would go out, because the gravity would pull more on the denser material, or the denser material would displace the lighter material.
Sure. But then there's this evidence of like the surface debris of the moon being older than the rock below it on the more interior.
Yeah, that's what. So that to me could make sense, because the moon's constantly getting hit by stuff, right? We see it's all pockmarked. It's been hit a bunch of times. And so it could be, a lot of the stuff it's going to be hit by is stuff that's been flying around the solar system since the formation of the solar system, before even the Earth formed. So having older material on the outside isn't a huge mystery to me, but yeah, I think it's just because it's being hit by stuff that's older than it is.
Yeah, I guess that could give that some credence there. And then there's the fact that the moon doesn't have a magnetic field, but a lot of the moon rocks that are brought back to Earth are strongly magnetized. That's an anomaly. Yeah.
So there's this guy quoted in the Who Built the Moon book. He's a data and photo control scientist. His name is Ken Johnston. He's from this company called Brown, Root, Northrop, which is a NASA contractor. And he told the author, Christopher Knight, that when the moon got hit by the Apollo 12 and 13, it didn't just reverberate, it actually wobbled. So he says the moon wobbled in a precise way, almost like it had gigantic hydraulic damper struts inside of it.
Yeah, so that makes me think of like the image that I'm creating is like having an iron core that helps with the center mass to help with the fact that it's this large structure. And then you have all of these like titanium struts or whatever material
that's even stronger.
Yeah. And these
strong,
struts
lightweight
are jettisoned out to all of the edges, almost
like
you
they're
would
like
think
hydraulic,
of like
so
the Death
that
Star
when the moon gets hit, they're able to like
move and adjust,
move with that in order to
maintain all the rest of the because otherwise, with such a small density, like something big enough, you would think would be able to knock it out of its orbit, or knock it out enough to cause damage to the way it rotates, to something that would create catastrophe, right? It's been bombarded so many times.
Right.
You would think eventually it would get hit by something that could really do drastic damage to it. So maybe this is a way to dampen that.
Yeah. So
over the eons.
Yeah. So essentially what you're getting towards is this alternate moon theory, which is that the moon is a freaking spaceship.
Yeah.
It's an artificial structure. It's a body that was put there to essentially, I don't know. We don't know what, but maybe help the development of life, stabilize the Earth system.
Either that, or it had a purpose at one time and no longer serves that purpose, but it's still there.
Yeah, but it still serves a purpose to us.
Right.
And so here's
to our life.
Right. So here's some other interesting facts about the moon, which is that we would not exist if the moon did not exist. Like, there would probably still be life on the planet, but it would have gone a totally different route. So the moon. This is a good time for that video.
Oh yeah.
Because that kind of introduces this concept. So Drew prepared a video here that I will play. This is from the History Channel called The Universe Moon Mysteries Revealed, Season 2, Episode 3.
These intense tides help create the right conditions in the oceans for life to develop.
Tides rip the outer layers of the crust off of the Earth and put them into the ocean. And that mineral-rich soup, the primordial soup, was capable of developing and evolving life.
And some scientists believe that tidal pools would have been an ideal setting for life to evolve and adapt to a terrestrial environment.
That would have been a great place, for example, for the first creatures from the sea to get their legs. They could have come into a tidal pool where it's wet half the day and dry half the day, and it would have been a great place to grow your legs and eventually move on to land.
According to
I think we go a little bit further.
Okay.
To astronomer Neil Cummins, we can't underestimate the moon's influence on our development as a species.
Without the moon, I don't think that process would have occurred nearly as quickly. We have evolved so that our biological clocks are based on around 23, 24-hour time. If the moon had never existed, the day would be 6 hours long.
Yeah. So, which is pretty interesting. If the day was 6 hours long, life would be totally different. What would that be like?
Yeah, so that would assume that
there would be
less
temperature swings throughout the day because you'd have less time of the sun pointing on to any given side of the Earth. So I would think it would like almost even out the temperature more. Huh.
Well, and the point before that was like the fact that the moon's effect on the Earth created the tides.
Right. So the tides exist without the moon.
Tidal pools.
Right. So the tides exist without the moon because the sun creates tides as well. But the sun tides only they're about a third as strong as the moon tides because the moon's so much closer to us.
Yeah. But they affect a larger area, I would assume.
Right. And so, like, even if the moon is like some sort of weird artificial body, the evidence is that the moon was closer to Earth because it is constantly moving a little bit further away. Mm-hmm. And so back in the early phase of Earth, when the moon was much, much closer, there would have been gigantic tides.
Right.
And these gigantic tides would have created huge
Tsunamis
waves
almost.
that move across the Earth and break apart the land and break it into little minerals that wash out the sea.
Yeah. Bring it back to the
and
ocean,
that would have put all of the minerals in the sea that would help with the formation of life, right? And then life takes off, you get fish, blah, blah, blah.
And then you create these tidal pools, what it's saying,
Right.
like these pools that are created inland that eventually dry up throughout the day. And then when the tide comes back, it reconnects with itself. So then you get these creatures that are being formed from the primordial soup that eventually
Especially
have to
because-
evolve in that environment.
Right, especially because the moon and the sun only every so often do their gravity fields line up in such a way that you get the biggest tides.
Yeah. The
And
super tides.
those super tides will allow even bigger amounts of water to come in even further. And then when that recedes, you're going to leave these tide pools that are isolated for months.
Yep.
And so you get these bigger chunks. And so you're essentially any life that lives on the coast and is prone to getting stuck in these tide pools. It would be
forced to
beneficial
evolve.
strategy to start evolving a way to move around in these shallow tide pools. And so fins turning into legs would make a lot of sense.
Yep. Yeah, and then the during the chances you get to when those tide pools dry up or whatever, then you get to spread your legs and move about a bit and develop it, and over time you start walking and
Yeah.
So the moon definitely plays a big part in the formation of life itself.
Your mic's pretty far from you there.
Yeah.
Some other funny stuff we got here. Oh, actually, we're overdue for another break here.
Take a quick break.
We shall be back in just, a few seconds for you, but a few minutes for us. We'll see you in a bit.
All right.
The moon is the spaceship.
If it's not fully hollow, it's partially hollow. Welcome back to Duality Check.
Yeah. Drew started going off on a bunch of moon talk. I was like, nope, save it.
Yeah, it's my personal theory that I've through all this research from the last week and just watching the videos and digesting as much as I can on this topic. I think it might be better if we finish some of the facts about the moon, and then I'll
Don't forget it.
Yeah, I won't forget it. Well, I'll probably forget part of it, but
So there's also some pretty strange effects that have been observed of the moon. So going back into ancient times, people have associated the moon with the menstrual cycle for women.
Sure. Because it's every month, and it goes through its cycle once a month. And
the month, M-O, it's derived from the moon. Ooh. Monday, Moon Day.
And somebody has an M-O. You got a certain M-O. You only commit crimes during full moons.
Right.
That's your MO.
Well, yeah. So there have been some studies that have showed that incidents of animal bites increase with the full moon.
Yeah. There's so many things that are attributed to the
aggravated assaults and homicides demonstrate a statistically significant clustering near the full moon.
Yep.
But not all studies find that, so it's not really definitive.
Well, and what debunkers would say about that specifically is that, it's a full moon, so people can commit crimes because, or do certain things because they can see better. But you can also get caught more easily.
Right. But our language is built around the moon affecting us. The word lunatic,
yes.
Lunacy. Yeah.
People going crazy during a full moon, and also the fact that our bodies are made up of how much water?
Yeah.
And we know that the moon has an effect on bodies of water.
Right.
So, that also could contribute. And all of plant life, all of, there's also, animal, like you said, animal bites increase. Like there could be it could be a coincidence, or it could actually have some credence. And, that's what we're here to do, is to shed light on some of these lesser known things and at least have the conversation, because it's just because it sounds crazy doesn't mean it is crazy. And you're not crazy for thinking a certain thing.
Yeah.
You're experiencing the world just the same way we are.
The other thing the moon does for us is it basically keeps us alive, right? So there's the orbit of the Earth. The Earth rotates around its axis, right? But we have a 22.5 degree tilt, okay? And that tilt as we orbit is what accounts for the seasons.
Yeah.
Right? Other planets don't have that nice gentle tilt like Earth. So a lot of the other planets have like really weird axes that are faced in like crazy directions. Like Venus is like turned over upside down.
I was gonna say,
so that it rotates against its motion around the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so you can like look at the two extremes that we could have on Earth, right? So like if Earth's axis was 0 degrees, if it was pointed perfectly up and down, that would mean the equator would be incredibly hot. It would never get a break. It would always be getting the worst of the sun. And then at the northern and southern latitudes, we would have it would never tilt towards the sun for like a summer season. So it would be permanently getting off axis sunlight, and you would have crazy hot or cold on the poles.
Yeah.
Even more than it is now.
Right.
And so there would essentially just be a couple bands of like habitable weather in the north and south that are disconnected from each other.
Which is also a theory of, the past here on Earth, not having an axis or having a different north-south or something.
So scientists attribute the moon for stabilizing our 22.5 degree tilt.
To what it is?
Well, yeah. The moon essentially allows us to keep that and to not turn over.
Even further,
right?
To continue to topple.
Some of the other planets in the solar system,
or do they change?
They're constantly changing their axes. But because we have the moon and because it's so large compared to us, it has an undue influence on stabilizing our orbit.
Yeah, that's weird.
Which allows us to keep our
because
seasons.
Of how massive it is in relation to us.
Right. The other extreme is if our pole was always pointed directly at the sun,
So
then you would have one side of the Earth that's always getting direct sunlight, and it would just be molten magma, and the other side would never get sunlight. It would be perfect night always.
You have night and day perfectly, and you would have a small, very small band
that would be habitable. Right.
And then you'd have to assume that there would be water. It could be water or land at that band.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're lucky because we get seasons and we get that nice, gentle 22.5 degree tilt, which gives us.
And we're locked
seasons.
there too, right? So
no, there's a nod to the tilt.
When
there's the precession.
It depends on where the moon is in relation to our tilt, or what?
No, I think it's called a Milankovitch cycle. But essentially, that 22.5 degrees changes slightly, but it vacillates up and down a little bit. I think it's small though, like a degree. I don't know the number.
So it's not much, but also the moon is still what's responsible for keeping us back, keeping us from fully tilting. Mm-hmm. Because imagine the just chaos that would ensue if that happened all the time. Like, life would be much more scarce than it is now. You wouldn't be able to inhabit the amount of planet we are inhabiting. Mm-hmm. And that might be something that happened in the past.
Right.
Without the moon. Imagine a world without a moon.
Well, the other thing is the world without a moon, we would orbit, like our day would be super faster. The moon slows us down. Mm-hmm. So we would have like that video clip we played said, like an 8-hour day.
6-hour day, yeah.
6-hour day.
So there is the text from the Greeks, like the Arcadians, the people who lived at the time before the moon. Mm-hmm. Like there's that whole theory of, and this was, I think it was the Arcadians. I think that was the name I'm thinking of.
The Akkadian? I don't know.
That's Arcadians. But they're the ones who lived before the moon's presence, as if it had appeared at some point. Yeah. We were talking about the idea that this might be a craft of some kind, or created, and that it might have just appeared at some point in history where humans might have been alive.
Well, so there's issues with some of that too, because we know that the moon is made of roughly the same material as Earth. I don't know how well they know, because I doubt we've drilled super deep into the moon, so the composition deeper down. But we know that the rocks and the samples we've brought back, they have the same oxygen isotope that we have here on Earth, which does essentially suggest that the moon was made up of Earth material.
Sure, that doesn't mean it was naturally made that way either.
Right, because if any other planet is going to have different oxygen isotopes, because it has to do with how far you are away from the sun.
Mm-hmm. It changes.
So we know that the moon was formed at our distance from the sun.
Right, but still doesn't mean that
at least the samples we've been able to test.
Sure. I mean, that basically says that it wasn't something that was, brought here from somewhere else, but it still doesn't mean that it wasn't built.
Right, and it could have been built. If it was built, it could have been built from the Earth, and
You take material from the Earth to create this structure.
Right. Obviously, this is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's Star Wars stuff. We're talking about what you would imagine in a Star Wars universe, but there's credence to a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
The moon's actually just a Death Star pointed at us at all times. It's just waiting for us to do something.
I was going to talk about a bit, and maybe this is a good time. I don't know how many other facts you want to go over.
No, go for it.
But the idea of the lizard people and how they inhabited. Like they came from. It's kind of like the story of the Anunnaki, like the 12th planet. It's basically the same.
This is the Ingo Swann idea
story, and Ingo Swann's involvement in that, like the psychological warfare that was happening in the late 40s and into the 60s.
Research, like the
psychic
MK
research,
Ultra, and the not the MK Ultra. What's the Project Stargate?
Project Stargate. Yep.
Yeah.
And so this Project Stargate was what's the term they use? And I don't know why I'm forgetting this because I've heard it so many times. Projected consciousness, like these are the people that are able to project their consciousness.
Yeah, this is remote viewing.
Remote viewing. That's the term I'm looking for. The remote
viewing project. It's if you want to look more into it, you can watch a Hollywood movie called The Men Who Stare at Goats, which is about that project. But there's
or you can
also
watch the Y-Files.
The Y-Files. There's a bunch of books about Project Stargate.
Mm-hmm. But the idea is basically these, CIA and recruited people who initially started in college research. They just were college students or college researchers that were doing the remote viewing. And one of these remote viewers was able to remote view a highly classified military installation that caught that caught the interest of the CIA and other government agencies, and they started using the remote viewers to, view places all over the earth for intelligence and also other places because they had information.
And whether or not you believe in remote viewing, the government did.
The government believed
the CIA
at the time.
Believed, and this was a real project they had going on.
Yeah, and it's actually like Ingo Swann's name has been verified on declassified information that's coming out, more recently.
Right, his association
with the CIA and remote viewing project and all that has been declassified. And we'll link as much as we can on some of this stuff. But the story was basically that they, remote viewed the dark side of the moon where they saw mushroom-like buildings, and Ingo Swann went up to a window where these humanoid creatures were, going about their business,
working in a lab or whatever.
Working in a lab, and he was just, watching what they were doing, and they noticed him.
Yeah.
He's remote viewing a facility on the back of the moon, and he turns around. They turn around and look at him and start pointing at him. And the person who's, introduced him to this project and brought him in on all this, basically tells him, you need to come back now to this place and, leave there immediately. And when he gets back, he basically tells his handler, the person that brought him in, you already knew they were psychic, right? So these are psychic beings that are living on the far side of the moon.
Which gels with people's, experiences. Mm-hmm. People who have had like abduction experiences, it's super common to describe them as communicating telepathically.
Yeah. And then the mushroom buildings was also something that the CIA or NSA, one of the people who were investigating Christopher Bledsoe, they said that there was mushroom-like buildings on the far side of the moon.
That was Hal Povenmire.
Yes.
It was a conversation Chris Bledsoe had with Hal Povenmire. And
he was the person who did a lot of the moon research early on in NASA that we had talked about previously.
Right. He was the one doing the occultation study.
Yep. So he had all of the information that was being gathered from all these early Apollo missions, right? And he had access to all that, and he's telling Christopher Bledsoe that yes, there are bases, and yes, I mean, let's take this all with a grain of salt, but like if you believe that there's something going on and you've experienced things and you're open-minded, then it all kind of comes back together.
There's also the phenomenon called transient lunar phenomenon. Have you heard of these?
Yes. The
So
TLPs.
these have been known like for hundreds of years.
Yeah, so it says, or I looked it up and it said NASA had reported that between 1540 and 1967, there were more than 570 sightings of light flashes on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what they later called TLPs, which are transient lunar phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
And these are just all sorts. And then there was like the atmosphere that has been on and off seen, and
like clouds and stuff,
and water vapor.
And so, there's different explanations. Like there's the explanations that
It's a reflection.
Well, that there's reflections is one. One explanation is that there's like pockets of gas that escape, and that certain types of gas, because if they were released out onto the surface of the moon, would not have the magnetosphere and the atmosphere of the Earth to protect them from the sun's radiation. They would be exposed to it, and that the sun could essentially impart energy on these gases to cause them to light up.
I see. And that would happen between here and the moon?
Yeah, that could happen on the surface of the moon if the moon releases certain gases that can be affected by the sun's energy in that way, like the different neon gases and whatnot that are common here on Earth.
But less common there.
Well, no, if the moon was formed from the Earth, they should be relatively as common as it is in our mantle, in theory. But yeah, we can't. Anyway,
determine.
So those are the three main ones. Like there's the impacts. Like so, if something hits, it would like light up a flash. But some of the lights are seen for like hours or days, even. And some of them are like really quick flashes.
And it's been happening like even
and they're
back
different colors
in 1540.
Too. Yeah.
Like even back as far as Aristotle times, there's claims
like
of it.
ever since we've had the ability to have telescopes trained on the moon, which the telescope was like between 15 and 1600.
Early astronomers. Yeah, early astronomers were seeing these phenomena because they're staring up there and they have clear skies and they have great views, Right.
So it could be all of those scientific explanations, but it could also be the moon's a spaceship and setting out, lighting up, running different systems.
Mm-hmm. How frequent? So if it's only 570, that's the number I got. 570 sightings of these.
That was only a couple year period. Though.
That was only within. Well, that was like 400 years, 420 years.
Oh,
between 1540. BC to 1967.
Yeah. Those are the documented ones, anyway.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it only goes up to 1967, so it's still happening today. People are still seeing these phenomena today.
Yeah, I think they're spotted on average like 2 or 3 times a month.
Right. Yeah, so it's happening still.
Yeah. Which is super interesting. The moon is weird.
Yeah, it's very weird. Maybe we go into a break here. What are you thinking? Unless you got something
for that part yet. Oh yeah, we are. Yeah, I think this is a good time for that.
I'll lead us in with this quote and we can spitball off that.
Oh, when we're back? I thought.
Yeah, no, I meant when we're back, I'll lead us in with it. Oh, you were ready for me?
I was thinking you were going to lead us out. Okay, cool. Well, we will be back.
So I'm just going to lead us in here with...
So this is a snippet from Secret History?
Yeah, it's semi-relevant in the sense that it'll spin us off into some conversations, hopefully. And this is from Chapter 7, The Age of Demigods and Heroes. And the part that I wanted to cover was basically just this. In the mystery schools, it was taught that a decisive change in this direction came about in 13,000 BC. From then on, the higher gods would find it difficult to descend further than the moon. Their visits to the surface of the earth became very infrequent, fleeting. It was believed that on these visits, they accidentally left behind the strange and unearthly mistletoe, a plant which cannot grow in the soils of Earth, but which grew naturally on the moon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't really see things grow naturally on the moon as likely, but yeah.
If we're talking about is a certain type of life.
Yeah.
So like if we're talking about this whole idea of the spaceship or beings living on the dark side of the moon or, you know, these ideas that we were, you know, hinting at in the last segment, it could mean, you know, that the higher entities or the entities that have a higher consciousness that can perceive a higher consciousness are limited to the moon,
right?
Is the closest they can get to the Earth.
Yeah,
but we know that the moon affects Earth in a metaphysical way. So in a sense, these gods have a way to change, or you know, gods of old, but what would now be considered just, you know, sentient entities, whether they be more advanced than us or not.
I like the idea that like the gods, there was a time where they were on Earth ruling over mankind, and then at some point they pulled back and they just ended up chilling on a moon base
and just watching or intervening. Like these UAPs could be some sort of unmanned aerial thing that's coming from the moon.
And the Greys are the drones of the god that can come down here.
Yeah, because they're
abduct us and bring us up.
Yeah. Yep. And that their consciousness is like this Chris Bledsoe stuff where they're projecting their consciousness on Earth into his mind. It's still in a lot of his stories where he's being abducted, quote unquote. He's brought somewhere else by these helper or these lower, but still higher than him beings. The aliens are taking him into their ship, and he's being brought somewhere where they can project their consciousness on him and affect his reality in a sense.
Yeah. I think when he got brought to go talk to the lady, he was like outside of our galaxy even, because I think when they asked him where he was, I thought he said he was like on the other side of Andromeda or something, right?
He said beyond Andromeda or something like that. Yeah. So they definitely brought him somewhere much beyond the moon even.
Yeah.
So that could be even higher level, right? Because I remember even like the waspy like ideals of like there being this hierarchy.
So yeah, this is where this moon topic ties in with the UFO topic. If there are beings visiting us and have the capability to travel across galaxies, then all of a sudden it seems a lot less incredulous that they would have the technology to create and maintain an artificial moon for the Earth.
Right.
You know, that's when the idea that these whoever, you know, maybe it's who the gods are that we've been talking about, you know, as humanity over the millennia, but they come down here, they see that the Earth is, you know, habitable to life or whatever, or it's got a really good potential for life. And so they help it along by creating a young moon out of the Earth that puts into place You know what?
stability.
Maybe what they do is they strike the Earth with the body. Like these theories don't have to be mutually exclusive.
That's true. And
Right?
that's why that super theory where they kind of combine them all kind of
Right, like,
makes a little bit of sense.
If they strike the Earth with something at just the right angle and speed to create the moon,
and then they could strike it again to slow it down.
And then they, as the moon is all that
perfect conditions.
material is out there, they
Bring it together
use it floating out there as their perfect construction site to assemble it in the way they want it assembled.
Yeah.
Which explains the weird mass distribution.
Yeah, and if they're this advanced, like the technology I'm imagining is like where they have this core, where they got this controlled iron in a core, where they've got these arms and a plate of titanium or whatever hard, substance it is. There's tons of titanium and chromium, zirconium on the moon that's been discovered, and these are rare on Earth, but they're in plenty on the moon,
asteroids too,
and on the moon.
Yeah,
and so like you would assume that if a race of sentient beings had access to that, they could create this shell. And then what I'm imagining is like they have a technology to bring matter in, like to create this gravity. So then all this stuff that's been shot off of Earth, they just activate a switch, and they've got all of the internal structure already in place, where all it has to do is attract the material to its surface, and it almost like sucks it all up like a vacuum.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Okay, yeah. So like you're saying, that's interesting how similar ours are, but yours is even cooler. So like, say they have some sort of craft with like gravity control, and it's made out of, it's got some like super dense core. Yep. It's got like a system all ready to go for like maintaining the reverberations from strikes and stuff. And it's got this super hard exterior, and they shoot something into the Earth to kick out all this rubble, and then they use their gravity tech to suck all that stuff in and collect it around the outside of their craft.
And that's now the mass of the structure.
Right. And so you would have to dig at least 3 miles deep to get to it.
Interesting. See what's going on the inside.
Which is why the asteroids don't penetrate further than that when they hit the moon, why the craters don't go deeper.
And that's why you still have the core, like they detect the core.
Right.
That's where my kind of theory took me.
Huh. Yeah, I like that idea. So like a vacuum cleaner, essentially, like it just...
Yeah, a universal vacuum cleaner that they can turn on a switch to create this gravitational force from the mass it is.
And then, so in Who Built the Moon with Christopher Knight, he's talking, like the theory he's proposing is that it's essentially it's like a clue, a hint, and it's also like a time capsule. Okay, so he's like, all right, so let's say you're some civilization who lives super far away and you turn Earth into your garden, okay? And you want to create life there and get it all ready to go, and you want to come back once it reaches a certain level. So what do? You set up a bunch of clues that only... And you create the moon in a way to create a stable atmosphere, to allow for seasons, to allow for tides, to allow for the optimum development of life on the planet. And then with that same stabilizing device, that moon, you set it in a trajectory so it will constantly be moving away from its planet. And you know that in a given amount of time with the processes it will put in place on that Earth, it will ultimately lead to some sort of intelligent species, because you've also presumably seeded the Earth with
that's what I was going to get
ancient DNA that has already certain instructions, or you have the understanding of like what path it's going to take through evolution. and then you leave.
Genetic engineering there.
And you're waiting for that species to open up your time capsule to pass your test.
Right.
In order for you to then get the message that, they're ready.
Yep.
And
my order's ready. Bing.
So you set up the moon with weird coincidences that were super unlikely to happen naturally, like it being a 400th of the size of the sun and a 400th of the distance to the sun, so that it can create perfect eclipses. And you set up.
It has all these different effects on humans and whatever animals are on the surface.
Right. You can cause lunatics and lunacy, and you can control the menstrual cycles of intelligent life forms, and you can influence
at least
that Earth that you're orbiting over.
At least you know that you're going to influence the behaviors of water, and most life has that as a building block. It needs this water as part of one of its building structures.
Yeah. So people who emphasize the water a lot, I think. So, yes, the moon creates the tides here and pulls on the water on the Earth, but it's not pulling on the water of the Earth any harder than it's pulling on anything else.
Right.
It's just the water's in liquid form and can move.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see the effect easier. So in the same way, the entire body, like our entire body, is being pulled by the moon, not just the water in us. Like everything is being pulled equally.
True.
So that part, we are a lot water, but I don't think that's necessarily special. I mean, any more special than water already is, which is pretty special.
Well, the thing that I was saying is our bodies, it's not just like a ocean of water inside of us. The water that I'm talking about is inside of our vessels. It's inside of all of these different cavities inside of our body, that when it affects us, it's not just moving water like a tide on the beach. It's changing the chemistry of how things are happening in the body.
Right.
So that's what I mean is we are sensitive to the fact that
I just don't
molecularly,
I don't know obviously we don't have scientific evidence yet that the moon does that, but even if we did, I don't see why it would, water would be special as for what it could have that effect on. I don't if it can have an effect, I don't see why water is the only thing.
Why is the catalyst for the effect? Yeah.
Other than water just being pretty vital to life in general, but.
Well, and the fact that
water does have interesting properties.
Well, we have 73% of our body is made up of water, right?
Yeah, no, and as far as we know, water is essential for life. Actually, no, I think we have found life forms that don't really. No, now I'm confused because I know there's some life forms down at the vents and stuff, in harsh
water,
but they're still in water, and they're gonna have water in them.
The one thing that now that you're saying that makes me question it is the fact that there's these the salt pools at the bottom of the ocean. The what's it called? The brine. It's basically a lake that forms within the ocean.
Right, where the heavier water, different water with different heavinesses and densities will separate.
Yep.
And you can get lakes, underwater lakes.
Yeah, it's crazy looking to see those. And then you have the eels that go down there for food. So there's it almost seems like there's something down there that could be living. And that's in a different form of these heavy waters.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
Huh. I wonder what the tidal effects of the moon are on the water separations under the ocean. Yeah. Are there heavy water tides below water? That
would be interesting.
Yeah. Huh.
I want to dive into the whole brine lakes in the ocean too. There's not a ton of evidence, ton of research on it as far as I've seen.
or at least a lot of like,
because you can't really go down there. Like you could send probes probably to get, but all you're gonna like, what would you really sense and what would you really?
You know what that makes
capture?
me think of? It makes me think of the game Subnautica. Have you ever played that?
I don't know if I've played it.
Dude,
I don't think I've played
cool. It's like it's a survival game. Like the premise is like your ship crash lands on this planet and you're like the only survivor, but you don't know that. So you're going around trying to find survivors. But it's an ocean planet. And so you have to like fabricate stuff for yourself and upgrade your technology and all this stuff. But as the entire game is underwater and there's like all these different biomes, and they're like, as you go deeper, there's areas that have these like brine lakes.
Oh, really?
It's really cool.
Ooh.
Some of them are like acid lakes and stuff. It's interesting, but it's all underwater.
There's probably oil lakes down there too.
Except oil floats.
Yeah.
There could be inverse oil lakes where there's oil caught in a cave
Heavy
system and the oil is collecting on the ceiling.
Ooh. Some of those are crazy. Like I've seen some of there's inscriptions found on a cave that the only entrance to that cave is underwater, and you have to like swim like hundreds of feet underwater to get to the entrance, and then you have to swim like hundreds of yards to get to where it comes back above water in order to get to these cave systems.
Yeah, do you remember what those are called?
I can't remember. I'll have to look it up.
I've heard of that. There's probably more
and
like
I've seen
that
images.
that haven't been discovered.
Yeah, because we know the ocean level rose.
Yeah.
So
by 400 feet. Yeah.
And so those are untouched, at least what's left within the cave that didn't get eroded, that didn't get touched by the ocean is still there.
So, yeah, the moon is...
it's weird.
I like the idea of the moon being some sort of weird base. Oh, there's also there's rumors and conspiracies about the Apollo program itself. Right. So like a lot of people don't even believe that we went to the moon.
Of course. Yeah.
And there's the whole theory with like Stanley Kubrick filming it and like all the hints that
he left
Kubrick filmed it and whatnot. But what's interesting about that theory is what I've heard as like a spinoff of that idea is that it wasn't that they filmed the moon landing to fake it because we couldn't do it. It's because they wanted the real mission to the moon to not be publicized. And so they had a Hollywood version that they could, show to the world, but they still actually went. They just didn't want people seeing what was there.
Because they had an idea maybe of what they were going to find.
Right.
Or...
because this is the 60s. This is after already like multiple UFO events have happened.
True.
And they supposedly already have the crash material from Roswell.
True.
And yeah.
And I've also heard the theory that how the Apollo missions, like they went all the way through like 15... and then they were canceled like 16, 17, or maybe it was even further.
Exact number.
I think it was 17, 18, 19. I don't know. It was like 18, 19, 20. I know it went up to at least 20.
Wherever it stopped, there was more scheduled.
Yeah.
And
I know
the theory is that they still went.
And they had further missions because they had gone there so many times that they had mapped and searched a lot of the surface, and that they found what they described as a craft that they were trying to recover or penetrate so they could find out what it was, or how long ago it's been, how long it's been there and stuff. And then Apollo 20 was the mission for that. And like there's this and this is from the Y-Files that I heard this from, and I did go to the YouTube channel that they linked for the video of it. But, he debunked it in the end as being just like somebody who wanted to create a story. But the idea is that Apollo 20 did happen, and it was meant to go find a craft, and that it was like a joint Russian-U.S. task force that went up the astronauts. There was one Russian astronaut with 2 American. It
was like
astronauts.
A rescue mission, right?
It was partially that.
Yeah.
So like the Apollo 19 had gone to do this same mission, and it had crash landed, or at least went out of contact with NASA, and so they sent Apollo 20 to go rescue them. But also their primary mission was to penetrate the ship and to find out what was in there. They were doing what Apollo 19 was sent there to do, and then if they could find Apollo 19, that was their their secondary mission.
Right.
Was to make contact with Apollo 19 if they saw evidence of them. And they found the ship. They went in there. They saw a bunch of hieroglyphics that were prehistory, and they took some samples. And then they saw that Apollo 19 had crash landed nearby, and they went to the craft, and there was a body inside the craft of an alien race of humanoid. And, during this whole mission, they're in contact with Mission Control and NASA and stuff. They were talking to him, and they're like, that's your primary mission. Bring that body back home.
Oh, right. I remember this story.
The idea, and then they eventually, I think one of them was alive. One of the Apollo 19 crew members was alive, or maybe not. I can't remember that part specifically. But I know that the terminology of bring it home, resonated in the story as being bring it home. That's not its home, that was kind of the thought. It was what do you mean bring this thing home? Back home. I said back home. Which could just be them saying bring it back home because you are from here and this is your home, but
right.
they took it as, what do you mean bring it back home? Or maybe there was some other terminology there that I'm missing that led them to believe that this thing had come from there.
Oh, I see.
Had come from Earth at one point. Yeah, I would love to dive into that story too. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a story and it's been debunked a bit enough for skeptics, but it's a fascinating story. It's fun.
Yeah.
I mean, all these moon theories come out of the fact that we don't have enough evidence to solidify any kind of scientific.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a permanent residence on the moon yet. There's no permanent bases.
Artemis is coming, though.
Yeah,
NASA's Artemis.
That's the idea.
In 2025, it's supposed to start
honestly,
again.
this next, probably
5 years.
50. I'd say 50 years, we'll have, a real
base.
We'll have people living on the moon.
Sure. Yeah. I think in the next 50 years too. Yeah. But I think in the next 5 years, we're going to actually
maybe
have a
more
real
how there was
there.
Always people stationed up in the ISS, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's not a lot, but there will probably be a permanently manned.
Yeah. Maybe it's 20 or 20
there.
people or something max.
By then. And I honestly, even then, it's still going to be governments and corporations who are in control of it. So, the opportunity to lie is going to be pretty big about what is out there. But also at the same time, the opportunity for leaks and other information and learning more. Obviously, our knowledge will grow about what the moon is, what it's composed of.
Yeah, I just would hope that eventually we get to the point where these private companies who are doing these things or private citizens who are doing these things are not. I mean, they have to get clearance from the government to even do these things.
Right.
So they have to sign some sort of contract.
You can't have a SpaceX without governments approving it.
Right. Yeah. Or even any of the private citizens who are doing it on their own behalf, I
mean, if we all had personal UFOs, and you could just zip up to the moon and do your own little study, that would be one thing. And the knowledge couldn't be controlled.
Yeah.
But
you couldn't really confirm any of the information until that point, though, really.
Yeah. If you're a skeptic for what is told by establishment figures, then there's going to be a large contingent of people who don't believe anything that they say about what the moon is like, and then there's going to be others who believe it all.
Yeah,
it's just be like everything else. There's going to be the conspiracy theorists and the
what's more
scientists
fun? What's more fun, being all buttoned up and sciencey, when necessary, for sure.
But it's really about how all this stuff interacts.
Let's be open-minded.
And really the moon thing comes to life when once your mind is open about UFOs, the moon becomes endless possibilities.
And a lot of these
and all the weird stuff about the moon starts to make more sense.
And all the weird stuff about existence, all the supernatural stuff starts to make a little bit more sense too.
Yeah.
If something like that is out there and capable of interacting with us, then you gotta be open to it. And
eventually the moon will
be conquered
so far away from us that we won't have any appreciable tides from it anymore.
That'll be so far. It's only moving like what, a centimeter a year?
Yeah, something like that. It's really slow.
But a centimeter.
In the process of this, though, I did learn that the moon has had like a slowing effect on the Earth. Yeah. Like they used to say, like they used to add leap seconds each year for like a period of time. And then there was a year where they didn't need one and the Earth stopped slowing down. I don't know if it's still slowing down or speeding up or what's come of it since this book was published. But they said it was like from the 70s to the 80s, they were adding leap seconds. And then all of a sudden they didn't need to anymore 1 year. So it's almost like if it's the moon causing the Earth to slow in its orbit, why would we all of a sudden lose that effect? Unless the moon
do we just stop taking that into account?
Yeah, no.
Or we just lose that second.
They had to add it because of the Earth slowing down, they had theorized that it will just keep slowing down year over year. Like whatever process is causing that slowing for decades, they figured would just continue on. But then in the 80s,
stopped.
They just didn't need it. Like the Earth didn't slow down; it stayed on schedule.
Maybe that was the end of the age, and we're headed back in the other direction for the precession of the equinoxes.
Interesting, yeah. For the time when Hathor will come back, and
it's just we slowed to the point where they don't need to add it, but it's still changing. But once we get to that point where it starts to tilt back, that's where the Easter 2026. As far as Chris Bledsoe says,
yeah.
But we'll see. We got a couple years. Well, yeah, we got a couple years.
Yeah. Whoa. Oh, there goes your mic. All right. Well, you got anything else? I think we should.
No, I think we got enough in this one.
This one was a little.
We're gonna probably bring the moon up in a lot of our other stuff.
Yeah, I've still got
I want to talk about Anunnaki.
About a third of that book to finish, so I might update on whatever else interesting about the moon I read in that at the beginning of whatever our next episode is.
Yeah, I want to read 12th Planet and talk about the Anunnaki and do some more research into the Anunnaki because they also mentioned the Arcadians and the time before the moon and stuff.
Yeah. I got to see Zechariah Sitchin give a live speech once.
Really?
Yeah, down in LA. It was some conference I went to
no way.
Pre-2012.
What was it like?
He was still alive before he passed. It was really cool. He was super old, but he was telling us all these stories about like how he's worked with different NASA scientists and stuff, and how he talked about how he's essentially been censored by NASA. And yeah, it's interesting. Zechariah Sitchin's a cool dude. Yeah, I can't wait till we do some Anunnaki stuff and talk about that.
Talk about him. All right, y'all. You can catch us on Facebook and Instagram for our weekly posts on episodes coming out, or you can watch the episodes or listen to the episodes. I guess it's not really much to watch other than pictures going by. The chapter arts.
Tell us your theories about the moon. Write the show at hosts@dualitycheck.net. We go to our YouTube and leave a like, comment, subscribe, comment, and talk to everyone. Tell us what other topics you're interested. You want to hear about the Anunnaki?
Yeah. And, emails is probably the best way to get us direct, where we'll actually get our notification, because otherwise comments and stuff, could be missed. We're going to go do our best to read everything we see.
Yeah.
We appreciate everything we got so far, and love you guys. See you later.
Adios.